They don't belong there, and you can't feed them. And since you're sympathetic to them, maybe your allegiance isn't very trustworthy either. So,
well, yeah, we see this really. I think the Chinese experience tells us a great deal about certain things. For example, when they wanted to enforce the one-child family, what did they do? Well, of course, they cut off all education to the second child. Your food rations were cut so that you couldn't get, a pregnant woman couldn't get the right amount of food. And ultimately, still, if they found ways around that, then they instituted compulsory abortion and compulsory plugging in of the IUDs and all this. And, when we would, somewhere in the tape, this business about people can carry two conflicting ideas around, or even espouse two conflicting ideas around, as long as they don't get real close together.
Yeah.
And what immediately came to mind was, here we have an organization like Planned Parenthood, freedom to choose, yet they support population control programs, which is, of course, not the freedom to choose, and no one ever calls them to account and says, no, wait a minute now, you're freedom to choose here, but you're supporting the Chinese program, which is compulsory. And I remember a statement from the late Alan Guttmacher, one of the medical directors of Planned Parenthood, and he said, well, if people limit their families and do basically what we say, well, fine. But if we need compulsory population control, we're going to have it. Anyway, I was just curious as to what would happen with people who wouldn't go along, and particularly that point about there wouldn't be any martyrs. And that was significant because I can recall having watched some movies about the Third Reich, that many times they would come late in the evening and people would be taken from their homes, but neighbors would never then ask, where did they go?
Mm-hmm.
They knew where they went.
Sergeant Hitzman Melissa mentions that in the Gulag Archipelago.
Does he?
Yeah.
And I think this is very similar to what we would see. People would just disappear, and you would not ask because it might endanger yourself or your family.
Yeah.
But you would know where they went.
If you ask questions, you draw attention to yourself, and then you might follow them to where they went.
That's
so
right.
Mind your own business and step over the starving man on the street who didn't go along. He didn't go into detail about, precisely how this would come about, but it's not too hard to imagine. In the past, the Nazis came, the communists came in the middle of the night, and people just disappeared. And one simple way to do this is if you're cut off from all economic support, so that you have no place to live and nowhere to eat. We already see a lot of homeless now. I just had a man in the office this morning talking about Eunice Child seeing people living in boxes downtown Pittsburgh today. These homeless guys living in boxes. Well, when the New World Order's here and you're living in a box, we can't have people littering recycling trash. Yeah. So you come around with the wagon and you pick them up. The frame of mind as you're growing up and formed is that human value resides in being productive. You have to have a prestigious position, or at least perform something useful.
Make a contribution.
And a truck comes by to pick up some guy who's living in a box and he's not making any contribution. Who's going to get excited about it? He's subhuman. He's a fetus. He's a zygote. He's a derelict. Fetuses and zygotes and derelicts all are the same animal. So what do you do? Dispose of them. Who gets excited about it?
You mentioned animal. I recall that when the Chinese communists came into power, one of the first things that they taught in schools was not any thoughts about specific political ideology, but evolution, that man was just an animal.
Mm-hmm.
And if man is just an animal, then we won't mind being herds and having masters who keep tabs on the animals. And we're one big ant colony, and we've got someone to direct traffic. And and speaking of traffic, getting back to, we talked about the aged, and again, people hearing this tape, it's phenomenal how many times these things on this table hit you. I just came back from New Jersey, which has a lot of retirement-type villages. And I've been there over a period of years, and there's a structure around a retirement home which has been uncompleted. It has to at least be 2 or 3 years. Now, they've recently completed it. It's kind of a roadway. But I think it would be easier to get out of a complex at a playland. It is so complicated. And yet the whole region has elderly people driving. And here we are, a fairly middle-aged couple. And for the life of us, we couldn't figure out how we were going to get out, what we were going to do. And so I asked some of the residents, I said, doesn't it bother you that they haven't fixed this road for years? And now they're coming up, and this thing is so complex, you just can't go across the street, which would have been the logical thing. You have to go down, and they have a jug handle, and you have to go over and under. So it takes you so long. And the woman replied to me, well, we just don't go out. We just don't go out. So here we are, this little retirement village where they have made it very difficult for a population. Maybe there's 40 or 50, actually probably more than that, several hundred homes in this plat with only one exit. And the exit involves such a great deal of bother that they said, we try to just cut down on the numbers or the times we have to go out shopping.
Right away, it makes me wonder if it's difficult to get out. It's also difficult to get in probably for visitors.
These retirement homes kind of remind me of like an elephant burial ground. You know what I mean? But there's no, the one thing you notice is there's no children. There's not the laughter of children in these homes.
My experience has been that people in like retirement homes, nursing homes, when they see a child, they just blossom. They're really delighted to see a child. Sure, they're happy to have their sons and daughters come, other adults, but when they see a child, it doesn't even have to be their own. It just has a very beneficial effect on their mood. And if these older people aren't seeing children, the other side of that coin is the children are not seeing older people either.
That's right.
So if you don't get used to seeing older people, they don't exist.
That's right.
And that, I think, is another interesting angle on what you said about.
And that's why, again, with the family, making sure your children see their grandparents very often, no matter how much that entails. The trouble is of the logistics is certainly worthwhile, because again, if you never see someone and you don't learn to love them, and you have no contact with them, when someone says, "Well, it's time for your grandpap to check out," well, who's that? Who's going to defend and fight for someone that they never even saw before? I remember one of the phrases. This is, again, so many of these things. You only have to hear them once, and they stick in your mind.
Yes.
They're so jarring.
Yeah.
Was this, we've already discussed sex without reproduction. Mm-hmm. Then he also said the technology would be there for reproduction without sex.
Right. And
this seems to me, this is a whole nother area, because one of the, again, contradictory things occurring, because you would think, well, if a land is so-called overpopulated, then you would want to diminish sexual activity, or, you'd want to get rid of pornography, you want to get everything that was sexually stimulating. But no, it's just the contrary. You want to increase sexual activity, but only insofar as it doesn't lead to reproduction.
Right.
That was the message, right?
That leads, and this is my own extension, he didn't say that, but that leads to slavery, because if you become enslaved to your gratification, whether it's sex, food, or whatever, then you're more easily controlled, which is one of the reasons the celibate priesthood is so important, and so many priests don't even understand that. But if you're addicted to sex, if sex is just divorced from reproduction, sex is something that you do for gratification only. I won't try to parallel with food, because you can't go without food. Then you can be more easily controlled by the availability or the removal of the availability of sex. So that can become an enslaving feature. Now, reproduction without sex, what you would get then is a product which has all the desirable attributes of a human being without any claim to human rights. The way we do it now, you say, well, you're human because you have a father and a mother, and you have a grandfather and uncle Fred and a family, so you're a human being, you have human rights. But if your father was a petri dish and your mother was a dust tube, how can you lay claim to human rights?
Not too much warmth there, is there?
You owe your existence to the laboratory, which conveys to you no human rights. And there's no God, so you can't go for any God-given human rights. So you're an ideal slave. You have all the attributes of a human being, but you don't have any claim on rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Brave New World, if you remember, they had the caste system, the alphas, the omegas, and so forth.
Yeah.
And the lowest caste, the way they brought about the different caste systems was that in the decanting room or the birthing rooms, the individual who was to be, let's say, to do menial labor or slave labor, work in the mines, they received just a little bit of oxygen to the brain, so that they learned to love their slavery, and they were very happy because they didn't know any better. They didn't have the brains or the wherewithal to do things. But of course, the higher in the caste you got, the more oxygen was given to your brain. So we actually had a group of subhuman beings, who would be at the, as you say, slaves essentially, and. But they would love their slavery.
Mm-hmm.
See, in the past, slaves probably haven't loved their slavery very much.
No.
But in this case, we have this technology which will make people love their slavery. And each caste loved being what they were in Brave New World.
Yeah.
And any of our listeners who hasn't read that recently, I think you read it recently again, didn't you?
Yeah.
Or read it for the first time?
Yeah, I read it.
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't remember. You may remember the wording of the slogan that was about the Nazi concentration camps. Something about work is peace and work is happiness. I don't remember whether it was Buchenwald or Auschwitz or one of them that had this sign about it.
Mm-hmm.
My recollection of the words is imprecise, but the idea is what counts. And here's Huxley writing Brave New World, saying basically the same thing before Hitler even was in power.
Oh, yes.
So Huxley knew something, didn't he?
Yeah, well, of course, he came from a family that probably contributed, at least in part, to this New World Order. A number of the English authors, H.G. Wells, there are a number of books from that period, and I think also from those associations who highlighted at least concepts of what was coming down the path. And when rereading, I read Brave New World when I was in high school, and reading it 30 years later. I can remember reading it in high school. I thought, boy, is this fantasy land? Reading it 30 years later, and I said, this is scary.
This is reality.
This is too close to comfort. Yeah, and then after I thought about it, I wasn't sure whether Huxley wrote it. There seems to be some type of the similar thinking between his writings and then this talk given by Dr. Day, because you get a kind of a mixed message in Brave New World that these things are not really quite good. It would be better if man still had a sense of humor, if he still had a sense of privacy, if certain things, the family still existed. But it's inevitable. They're going to go. Too bad. I feel a little sorry about that, a little sentiment. But the new order has to come in, and we're going to have to make room for it. And I got that same impression from the things that have been said about this day tape. There seemed to be he wasn't real happy about some of the things, but then, they're going to occur anyway, and make it easier on yourself. The easier more you accept it, the easier it's going to be for everyone around. And I'm kind of doing you a favor, you physicians out there this evening. I'm going to make it easier for you by telling you in advance what's coming, and you can make your own adjustments.
somewhere in Scripture, I think it's after the flood, God said, I will write my law on men's hearts. And I feel the same parallel that you do between Dr. Day's reaction to what he was exposed to and mine, seeming not totally accepting of this, and Huxley seeming not totally accepting of what he wrote down, but both saying, well, there's a certain inevitability to all of this, and so, let's try to talk about the best parts of it. It's going to be good for people. Technology will be better. Quality of life will be better. So you live a few years shorter. But they both do seem to send out messages of not buying the whole package. And I think...
And maybe wishing some people would ask more questions. This business. Well, many... looking back over history, there are many leaders or individuals who thought, well, they had an idea of what a new world order should be. Certainly Hitler did, Stalin. But what was lacking during these periods is that they lacked the technology to carry many of the things out. Surveillance, constant monitoring. But in the so-called New World Order, it's going to be very difficult to escape because technology will provide those means which had been lacking those totalitarian-minded individuals from years ago, right?
I can't remember on the original tapes, did I mention the phrase where he said, this time we're going to do it right?
No, he didn't.
Oh, okay. There were so many details to get in, but that's... When he mentioned bringing in the New World Order, he said, this time we're going to do it right. And right away I'm wondering...
What do you mean, this time?
What do you mean this time?
Have we done it before? What?
And there was no explicit explanation of that, but I think it's fairly easy to infer that previous efforts had to do with the Third Reich and communism and...
everything going back to the French Revolution, I would say. So,
and your point about the technology is critical with computers and all means of exchange being controlled by electronic impulses. Nobody has any wealth. You own nothing of value except access to electronic impulses, which are beyond your own control.
A cashless society?
A cashless society. So when your reward for working is so many impulses on the computer, and then you go to checkout or the furniture store or clothing store and you buy and you, in exchange you give so many electronic impulses. The only claim you have is to these impulses, and the people that run the system can give or take them as they choose. Up until this time, there was no way the statement in the book of Revelation that said, no man can buy or sell unless he has a market of beast. There's no way that could be enforced. People say, hey, I'll trade a bushel of tomatoes for a bushel of wheat. If you ride my kids to school, I'll give you 6 ears of corn.
Mm-hmm.
Or
bartering, right.
And even not going necessarily to that, maybe there was always gold and silver and other forms of money that were even better than bartering. But with this cashless society, this is the first time, I believe, in the history of the human race where the entire population of the world can be controlled economically so that somebody can say, I know I'm pushing the right buttons, I know how much credit you have electronically, I know where you spend your money electronically, and you cannot buy, you cannot sell unless you get on my computer. Right now you have a half a dozen credit cards in your pocket, but pretty soon they'll be narrowed into one credit card, and then when the ostensible reason is people lose their credit cards, and we have to get rid of that and put the implant in.
That's right. And where can you put the implant? On your hand or on your forehead?
Where it has to be accessible to the scanner. So your right hand to your forehead.
Speaking of scanner, when we had the TV war, the Gulf War, and the first war, you just sit there and 24 hours a day, just like being on the battlefield there. but there was several points made about the advances in technology and how they could spot just one little individual down in I mean, they could they used the constant reference to pinpoint. They could pinpoint. Well, I imagine that with these the different technologies, they could also pinpoint a couple of renegades in the New World Order. I mean, what was the technology which was applicable to a so-called enemy can also be applicable to this controlling the order.
Exactly. It's infrared stuff that is. I'm sort of amateurish about this, but any heat source, like a deer or a human being, a renegade, can be picked up by an infrared scanner, and you get sort of an outline of whether it's a deer or a sheep or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My first hearing about them was in the Vietnam War, where our troops used them to detect the enemy. Now that's 20-some years ago, so they're probably even more sophisticated now than they were then. But with this kind of surveillance, it'd be pretty hard for anybody to escape and say, well, I'm just going to go off into the mountains and be a hermit and escape the New World Order. I can shoot deer and eat berries and survive. And I've got a wife who's pretty sturdy. She'll be able to survive, and we'll do what the Indians did before Columbus got here, and we'll all survive. The New World Order say, no, you won't, because we're going to find you.
Yeah, well, even in Brave New World, they had a group of people who still lived as a family, and the women breastfed, and of course they were called the savages.
Yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah.
Okay, we won't have any savages. We'll cultured, we'll be thin, and our teeth will be straight.
And something also that was mentioned, forests could, and if necessary, would be leveled or burned. Now this comes out of this overall movement about Goddess Mother Earth and how we have to protect the ecology.
Oh yes, the environmental movement, right.
But the environmental movement, this stuff's all expendable. If we want to get somebody who's trying to get away, we'll burn down the whole forest, we'll find them. That was stated, that deforestation would and could be brought about as necessary to be sure that nobody gets outside the control of the system.
Well, we're just about drawing to a close here. How did you feel after, let's see, it's been about, 22 years now since that original lecture, and it probably isn't a day that goes by, at least since I've heard the tapes, that I don't think about the things that this Dr. Day said.
You get constant reminders. Not a day goes by. Something doesn't say, that reminds me of such and such, whether it's surveillance or security, somebody selling a security system to keep your house from being burnt.
Or clothing. Or I opened up a toy catalog the other day, and I noticed that there didn't happen to be any baby dolls in the toy catalog. Of course, going back to the idea we don't want little girls to be thinking about babies. They only had one little doll, and it was kind of an adult doll, and nothing that would raise anyone's maternal instinct there. Well, Doc, what's the prognosis?
Well, left to man alone, I think the technology is already here, and with technological progress, I think it is inevitable, if man is left to his own devices, that some men will be able to assert total control over other men, over other people. Man left to his own devices, the tendency is in groups like this then for internal dissension to arise, where the leaders would be at each other's throats too, each saying, no, I'm more powerful than you, I deserve more than you.
Who will control the controllers?
Yeah. They would battle themselves, I think, so that they would create, the seeds of their own destruction while they're creating the system. But the other thing, I wonder if indeed this may be time for our Lord to come back and say enough's enough. If because you're going to destroy my planet Earth, and I am in charge of the planet. I'm in charge of mankind. Mankind will be destroyed or whatever if I say. I'm not allowing my creatures to assume and assert this degree of control where you're going to destroy the whole thing.
I was just thinking, as you was just saying that, is that in past, dictators could kill people, they could torture them, but essentially they could not change what it meant to be a human being. They could not change human nature.
Yeah.
Now we are going to have, with this, the new genome project, the multi-billion-dollar project, where they're going to be getting a tab on everyone's genes. No one shall escape. Everyone shall have their genetic codes and all this. And with this opens the door to manipulation to change the very meaning of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And one then, if one has an entity then that no longer has free will, you just have to wonder, at that point, our Lord says, enough.
Just as Lucifer set himself up as God in the beginning, some people now would set themselves up as God and say, I control the computers, I control the genomes, I control everything. I am God. And at that point, then he would have to say, no, you're not. I have to demonstrate to you, you're not. I'm still God. You're just a creature.
Yeah. And as you said on the original tape, we believe in what our Lord has said, in the sense that he will not leave us orphans, that, he will be with us to the end of time.
This right away now begs the question when they come around and say, it's your turn to sign the allegiance form. What are you going to do? When Henry VIII came around, he said, well, you either sign here and join, or, and while he's telling you this, they're throwing the noose over the limb of the oak tree and saying, slipping the noose around your neck and saying, you want to sign this, or do we slap the horse out from under you? And a lot of people said, I won't sign it, and they were martyred. Despite his having said there will be no martyrs, certainly there will be martyrs. And the implication in his statement was, well, they will not be recognized as martyrs. But there will be martyrs, and they will be recognized as martyrs. And maybe not in the same way as in the past, but I think this is something that maybe all people need to sort of prepare themselves for. When I'm nose to nose with this choice, are you going to sign this allegiance or not, or we're going to put you in a boxcar and you're going out to Arizona into the desert. People have to be prepared to make a decision.
And I think it would be an understatement not to say, or to say, that this tape has great meaning, and it's just like a forewarning, and it gives us ideas of things we should do and things we shouldn't do. And I think everyone listening to the tape will come up with different things that he can do on a small scale. I think that's the beauty of this thing. It's not, as he was talking, it wasn't like real earth-shattering things that he was talking about. He was talking about little things, television, things that we do every day, things that are under our control, the books we read, and I think probably some of these changes, if they're going to occur, will occur with the individual person within that family, with him getting the word out, and then doing the little things. I think they matter over the long haul the most.
Just as with the prisoners who survived the brainwashing, I think people who are spiritually oriented, who are thinking about God, thinking about their relationship with God, are the ones who will then be better prepared, very equipped to survive this world and the next. Whereas those who are just focused on meeting their needs right now, strictly the material needs of the day, they're more easily controlled. Under the threat of losing your comforts or losing your food or losing your head or whatever, certainly some people are going to yield, and those who I think will survive, and I really mean in both this life and the next, they're going to be the ones who are going to have to be prepared, because it's my belief, when the time comes to make the decision, you're going to sign on it or you're not going to sign on it. it's too late to begin the preparation and start saying, well, let me think about it. You won't have time to think about it. You're going to either say yes or no. I hope a lot of us make the right decision.
I do so too, and I think the tape will change as many lives and have hopefully as good an effect as it had on mine and on yours. So let me thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For further information, please contact the U.S. Coalition for Life, Box 315, Export, Pennsylvania, 15632. Your comments and criticisms and any other information which you might have regarding this tape